Okay. All right, welcome everybody. I am Colleen Hitchcock. I am a member of the Board of Directors for the Swampscott Conservancy. Thank you to everybody for joining this evening for our evening webinar where we are going to explore cat conservation or have a cat conversation, maybe explore bird conservation with Dr. Pete Marra. Just before we get started, I want to introduce everybody to the Swampscott Conservancy and what the Conservancy does here in town. And I also want to publicly acknowledge the support from the Brandeis Environmental Studies Program through the use of this Zoom account in hosting our webinar. If you are new to the Swampscott Conservancy, we are a small nonprofit in town with the mission to support our local open spaces. We primarily take a four-pronged approach in accomplishing that through education programs such as this one, which you are attending, to habitat improvement projects such as our Town Hall Pollinator Project, our Swampscott Middle School Restoration Project, and most recently with the Salem Forest River Trail Connector Project, which just launched this past weekend. There are also opportunities to get involved with us to do citizen science. We have an active iNaturalist project in town documenting biodiversity, which our Conservation Commission is using to start developing our species lists. We also support the state My Coast project looking at king tides and storm surge along our community, and also do community building projects such as having some birding events, hikes, and general get-togethers when the conditions allow. If you want to do more as part of the Swampscott Conservancy, we encourage you to please become a member, join our monthly meetings, attend our education and speaker series, participate with us in our citizen science projects, and join in to volunteer when you can. If you'd like to get in touch with us, here is our email information and Facebook. We are also on Facebook and Instagram. I'm guessing all of you have gotten our email since you are here today, so thank you for that. And with that, I'm going to transition over and would like to welcome Dr. Pete Marra, who will be joining us tonight to explore the impacts of free-ranging domestic cats. Dr. Marra is the director of the Georgetown Environment Initiative and a professor in biology and the environment and a professor in the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown. He joined Georgetown after a 20-year career at the Smithsonian Institute, most recently as the director of the Migratory Bird Center. He has a PhD from Dartmouth College and has authored over 225 papers published in journals such as Science, Nature, and Conservation Biology. He has also co-edited the frequently cited book, Birds of Two Worlds, and also has a second book that relates very pointedly to tonight's topic, which is Cat Wars, the Devastating Consequences of Cuddly Killer. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Pete and thank him for joining us this evening. In terms of how the webinar will go, we are a relatively small group this evening. Feel free to put your questions in the chat if you have a question that comes up as we go along. If you would like to ask a question, given the size, you can also feel free to raise your hand and interrupt, and we will also save time toward the end to take questions. All right.
Thanks, Colleen. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Great, great. Well, thanks for joining this evening. The first thing I want to emphasize is that I get it. I 100% understand the allure of cats. They are amazing animals. They truly are. They're loved by millions and millions of people in the United States alone. They're probably America's favorite animal. I'll be honest, I'm a dog person, but I've owned a cat. His name was Tookus, and it was a cute cat, and it lived a wonderful indoor life. But I happen to have a little bit of an allergy towards cats, so I may not have another cat, even though I'm facing constant pressure from the family to get a cat. But I do understand they exhibit remarkable behaviors. They're fun to have inside. They stalk, they pounce, they chase balls of yarn. They chase laser pointers, feather toys. and they curl around your leg, they curl around your neck, all while plotting your demise, which they are doing because that's what they do. They're predators. So they're a wild animal, but they cuddle on your lap. So there's all these incredible things that they do that make them and give them these supreme pet-like qualities. So it's not hard to understand why they're America's favorite pet. They just are. But the thing we have to remember is that cats are indeed predators. They reproduce really rapidly, but like rabbits. Sometimes they have 2 to 3 litters a year that are made up of multiple kittens. And they can be incredibly destructive to wildlife. They can spread disease. When they're outdoors, they face harm themselves. They can get hit by cars, eaten by coyotes. There's nothing about them being outside, that makes sense. Honestly, there's nothing about it that makes sense. Consequences for cats, consequences for wildlife, consequences from humans, from the diseases they spread. So this evening, I'm going to talk about all these issues. I'll describe the current situation with the outdoor cat. I will talk about the book that I wrote in 2016 with a good friend of mine, Chris Santella. I'll not go into all the details because the book covers a lot of the details, but I'll touch upon a few of them. But as I'm talking about them, the underlying question that we have to ask ourselves, given all the information we have about cats, and given the situation we are in with respect to the 6th mass extinction and the pressures that the natural environment is already facing, should we let cats persist outdoors despite the consequences they have for wildlife and humans? That's fundamentally the question. And that is a huge problem. So let's talk about cats. Let's back up and talk about their history a little bit. So globally, there are about 40 species of native cats. Most of us are familiar with the 7 big ones, like the lion, the tiger, the cheetah, the puma, the snow leopard, the jaguar. I'm sure I forgot one. But those are the 7 big cats. But then there are about 33 other species of native small cats, like the sand cat, the flat-faced cat, the jaguarundi. There are incredibly interesting species of cats that occur across the globe. This is the European wildcat. This is a native species of wild cat. And you might think, well, why? I have a feral cat in my neighborhood that looks just like this. Well, it's probably not this cat. I'm sure it's not, because this only occurs in parts of Europe and Asia and the UK. But it is where our domesticated cat came from. And we think domesticated cats arrived onto the scene around 10,000 years ago. Bones of domesticated cats were found in graves, and they were dated back to around 10,000 years ago. It was at a time when people started to store grains, people started to store water, live in houses. And when you do that, you attract a lot of rodents to the scene. And when you get rodents, you get predators. And so the European wildcat started to come around there, and we don't know exactly how it happened. Maybe individuals were captured, and then they were, bred in captivity for these ones that liked humans, or somehow they just became much more common and bred on their own around humans and slowly became domesticated that way. Whatever happened, they have been part of our culture for a long time, around 10,000 years. Dogs have been part of our culture for around 40,000 years. So the dog domestication is much older than the cat domestication. Cats have become embedded in our culture. They're in Roman and Greek architecture as statues. They're in our paintings. This is a Pablo Picasso painting. Pablo Picasso left us hundreds of paintings, many of which included cats. He was a big fan of cats and had them all over the place outdoors. Mark Twain was a big fan of cats, as was Ernest Hemingway. There are still descendants of Ernest Hemingway's cats at his house in Cuba, which I've been to. I've seen the descendants of those cats. You can go to his house in Miami. He has descendants of those cats in Miami. So they're embedded in our culture in many ways, including our current culture. In cartoons, things like Felix, Morris for president. I think most of us on this call probably would be okay with Morris for president right now. Sylvester, Little Kitty, even Grumpy the cat, who died recently. There was a coffee named after Grumpy the cat, the Grumppuccino. So cats are embedded in our culture, but they are domesticated. And what's fascinating and what is so problematic is that because they're so embedded in our culture, it's hard to make a case for them also to be so destructive to our wildlife and to our environments, which they are. But the thing that we have to remember is that cats are domesticated animals. They occur in no native ecosystem anywhere in the world, just like the sheep, the cow, the dog, the chicken, the pig, and the bunny rabbit. These are all domesticated species that have wild relatives, have different ages, in terms of when they were domesticated. But the cat is a domesticated species that does not occur in any native ecosystem. There are a lot of cats in the United States, but the thing I want to emphasize as well here is that this is a global issue. Cats occur globally, except on the poles, but they're on every other major continent, and they are problems on all the other continents. In the US, we think there are around 90 million owned cats. Roughly about 66% of these go outside. That's about 60 million outdoor owned cats. Then there are somewhere between 60 to 100 million unowned cats. So I usually classify cats as the owned ones that are either indoors, that's awesome, that's great, or the owners let them out. And then there are these unowned cats, supposed unowned cats that occur out in nature but have some affiliation to humans. And then there's feral cats. So the word feral is something else entirely. It means there's no dependence on humans whatsoever. And I've been consulting with the National Park Service, and right now the National Park Service claims there are at least 40 national parks with cat problems. So there are somewhere between 80 to 160 million outdoor cats in the United States alone. That's a lot of outdoor cats. At the same time, we've got somewhere between 750 to 800 native species of birds. Species like swallows and woodpeckers and cuckoos, red-eyed vireos and orioles and buntings and flycatchers and terns. And I just was the senior author on a paper last fall reporting the loss of about 3 billion birds. We are in the sixth mass extinction. 57% of bird species in North America are declining significantly. That is a massive problem. Species like the cerulean warbler has declined by over 75% in the last 50 years. That means 3 out of 4 birds are now gone. Piping plover was endangered and threatened. Some populations still are, others are not. Cats are a major threat to piping plovers because they nest on beaches, and beach areas tend to be areas that are targeted for feral cat colonies or outdoor cat colonies, unknown cat colonies. So tonight I'll focus on the consequences, then I'll talk about the solutions, and then I'll talk about the battles. And these are not battles against cats specifically. This is a human problem. I totally recognize that. This is one of the criticisms I get, and of course it's a human problem. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be trying to solve it. But there are major battles between those people that want to defend nature and wildlife and those people that have this sole focus on defending cats. I am an animal advocate. I'm a wild animal advocate. I don't have anything against cats per se. I'm all about protecting the environment. That's what I'm about. So let's start off in around 1880. This was, put yourself on an island off of the coast of New Zealand called Stevens Island. At about that time, there was, actually it was I think 1890, sorry. There were several major shipwrecks. Shipping was the major way people moved things around the globe. And the boats primarily were wooden. And if you were coming in at night into a port that you didn't really understand, didn't know where the rocks were, and you hit a rock, that rock would tear a big hole in the wooden belly of that ship, and sailors probably would die. In fact, at this time, in the late 1800s, 3 major shipwrecks had occurred in this area around Stevens Island, and many sailors had died. So the New Zealand Maritime Agency decided to put a lighthouse on Stevens Island at the time. And they hired 3 lighthouse keepers. One was the name James Lyall. And James had a wife and at least 1 child and a cat named Tibbles. And they went out to Stevens Island, and within the first 6 months, this cat started to bring in a lot of dead birds, including this one here. This is the Stevens Island wren. And the cat brought in about 15 of them and then no more. And James Lyall happened to be an amateur naturalist, so he knew how to make specimens. And he recognized that these birds were ones he'd never seen before. So he made the specimens, deposited them in the museum, and got confirmation that these were a new species. And within a year, it was recognized that this species was extinct. So it's thought of as being one of the most rapid extinctions on the planet, all because of this cat, Tibbles. I wish I could say that was the last case of a species going extinct due to cats, but I can't. Right after my book was published, we had thought that it was about 32 species that had gone extinct due to cats. But cats now are known to have contributed to the extinction of at least 63 species on the planet. 2 reptiles, 40 birds, and 21 mammals. That's a lot. That's major. Excuse me. And they're thought to threaten another 400 species on the planet. And so they are continuing to be a major threat to biodiversity. Major threat to biodiversity. Still, even though we know that cats are continuing to impact bird populations around the world, people still want to know, why, but they're not a problem on mainland areas. So we asked the question, what is the magnitude of mortality imposed by cats in the United States? And so we basically started to assess this in the context of looking at all direct human-caused bird mortality. So how many birds per year are killed by wind turbines? How many birds per year are killed by buildings and collisions with wires, automobiles, or cats? We basically pulled together all the data out there and came up with estimates of the total number of birds killed by each of these direct sources of anthropogenic mortality. And what we found was that in the United States, we estimated that around 2.4 billion birds were killed per year by cats, somewhere in the range of 1.3 to 4 billion birds per year. 69% of that mortality was caused by unowned cats, and around 30% caused by free-ranging owned cats. And it's not just birds. It's also species like mammals. And we know cats kill a lot more mammals. We estimated 12.3 billion mammals were killed per year, and around 400 or 500 million reptiles, and 173 million amphibians. Put in the context of the other sources of mortality, buildings, automobiles, power lines, et cetera, all the way down to wind turbines per year, cats dwarf everything else. Prior to us doing our analysis, people thought buildings and windows were the primary cause of, this is not including habitat, but they thought buildings and windows were the primary cause of mortality. But after we pulled together all the latest literature, we quadrupled the impact of cats relative to buildings and collisions. It's really significant. So the other question we always get is, are cats having population level impacts? That basically means, is the mortality what we call additive, or is it compensatory? Compensatory means that the cats will kill a certain number of birds, but bird population can compensate. They'll reproduce more and it'll compensate and the numbers will be the same. Or is it additive mortality, such that the number of birds or mammals killed by cats will suppress the population even further? Well, so we can ask that question. What data are there to suggest that cats are having population level impacts? Well, it turns out there's a lot of papers on this, and we've written a whole paper on the population level impacts, summarizing those papers. I'll highlight one in the book. There are several cases. This is a study done by Kevin Crooks and Michael Soule. They were working in fragments in Southern California, some large fragments, some small fragments. And these fragments were surrounded by houses with people that own cats. The large fragments had healthy coyote populations because coyotes are known as area sensitive species. The smaller fragments didn't have as many coyotes. And what we found was that in the large fragments, the coyotes were eating the cats. They were taking these cats out. And so it wasn't, the cats were not preying on bird populations. So the bird populations in those areas were doing really, really well. Diversity was high, they were reproducing, et cetera. In the small fragments, coyotes weren't present, so the cat numbers were really high, and the cats were eating the birds, and they demonstrated all these different things. The diversity was low of birds. In fact, there were local species extinctions due to the cat predation. So clearly, a wonderful example of cat population impacts. So, I just showed you the cats cause extinctions. The magnitude of mortality is really high, and the population level impacts on mainlands is significant. So in terms of the wildlife impact, it's tremendous. Cats are second only to rats in terms of causing numbers of extinctions. Now, again, this doesn't talk about habitat loss. Habitat loss is a big deal, but just because habitat loss is the major driver doesn't mean we should be focusing only on habitat loss, right? We should be focusing on all the major drivers of decline for species, just like with human health. If doctors only focused on the number one driver of health problems, they'd be focusing on heart disease in white males and ignoring all cancers, ignoring diseases like COVID, and ignoring a lot of different things. Speaking of diseases, cats spread lots of diseases. So let's talk a little bit about one disease in particular, Toxoplasma gondii. It's a protozoan parasite. In fact, this is an image of a human eyeball, and this scar here in the middle is known as an ocular toxoplasma scar, which if you go to your eye doctor, ask your eye doctor how often they see ocular toxoplasma scars. So let's dig in here a little bit because this is fascinating biology. So Toxoplasma gondii, if you've had children or you know people that have children, their doctors probably or should have told them no changing the kitty litter box. And nowadays they even say no gardening because of the risk of being exposed to a Toxoplasma gondii oocyst. This is a Toxoplasma gondii oocyst, which when a cat is infected with Toxoplasma, this protozoan parasite, it will shed these oocysts by the thousands for 10 days to 2 weeks. Now, how this works is this Toxoplasma, this gondii, this protozoan parasite, it breeds definitively only in cats. It cannot breed sexually in any other animal, only in cat guts. And so when it gets into a cat, that cat becomes infected and sheds the oocysts, which imagine them being microscopic eggs, into the environment. Mice, birds pick up those oocysts, and those oocysts migrate in those mammals to their brains, and they change the behavior of those mice or those birds. And this has been shown in experiments. Those rats or those mice or those birds become attracted to cats. They are attracted to cat urine. They're attracted to everything about cats. And why they do that? The thought is that they do that because then they're easier to prey on. And the cat then, when preying on that mouse, that infected mouse, ingests the oocyst again, and a new cat acts as a new host for that toxoplasma. It's called the host manipulation hypothesis, or the fatal attraction syndrome, because each of those mice become attracted to the cat. The problem is that humans are an unintended host of this. And if a human, say a pregnant woman, ingests a Toxoplasma oocyst, the female can have an early abortion or a miscarriage, or the fetus can have all sorts of abnormalities. This has been known for a long time, and that's why doctors have recommended not changing the kitty litter box. But despite this being an issue that is well advertised and discussed in first world countries, this is still a big problem in developing countries with pregnant women. I wish that was it. I wish that was the only problem. But we now know that Toxoplasma gondii is a big issue for all sorts of problems, disease problems. I'm going to give one example from Denmark. This is a study looking at Toxoplasma gondii infection and self-directed violence in mothers. This was a study done in Denmark where they looked at 45,788 Danish women who also had their levels of Toxoplasma gondii measured in connection with childbirth from 92 to 95. And what they found was that women that were positive for Toxoplasma gondii were 2 times more likely to commit suicide than those that were negative. These sorts of studies are correlational, but there are enormous numbers of studies that show suicide risk, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia is a big one, and a risk-taking behavior more generally associated with Toxoplasma gondii infection. If you want to read more about this, you can read about it in my book, or just Google the Atlantic. Your cat is making you crazy. There's a wonderful article there written about all the various effects of Toxoplasma gondii in humans. It's the #1 foodborne illness in the world. In the United States, it's thought somewhere between 15 to 20% of all people are infected with Toxoplasma gondii. It's a lifelong infection. The spores go out of your brain and they lodge in your brain, but they move around in your brain. And sometimes they move down to your eye, causing this ocular toxoplasma scar. It can cause blindness. It has caused blindness in lots of people. And it's thought that, this is just a rough estimate, that 30% of humans globally are infected with Toxoplasma gondii. Again, it's a lifelong infection. For a long time, people thought it was asymptomatic, but we now know that the severe symptoms may appear to be asymptomatic, but lots of these underlying low-level things where people are doing certain behaviors are not asymptomatic. They're very symptomatic. There are other diseases that are caused as well by cats that I'm not going to go into, things like rabies, leukemia, a variety of things. And I wish the Toxoplasma only impacted humans. It doesn't. It impacts wildlife too, lots of wildlife. This is a Hawaiian monk seal. There are less than 1,000 left in nature. Just when our book came out, there was another Hawaiian monk seal that was killed by an ingestion of an oocyst. And there have been about 5 or 6 in the last 3 or 4 years that have died. And when you have just 1,000 individuals left, every individual matters. But these oocysts persist in nature in all sorts of conditions, in frozen soil, in marine environments, and just like styrofoam, popcorn, packing material, it all washes down into marine environments. In California, the California sea otter, another threatened species, its primary mortality cause is Toxoplasma gondii getting into marine environments where it ingests them. It's known to kill in like zoos. If cats get into zoos, it's a real problem for kangaroos, whole suite of animals. So I hope I've convinced you that cats are problematic from a wildlife protection perspective, from a human health perspective, and also in the diseases that they spread. We'll talk a bit more about how cats themselves are impacted by being outside. But let's start talking about some of the solutions to this problem of outdoor cats. Just when our book came out in 2016, my wife and I were at a local restaurant here. I live in Tacoma Park, Maryland, and October 1st was our anniversary, just passed. We went to a restaurant and the waitress came up to us and didn't know who I was and said, I'm a crazy cat lady. And I said, that's great. It's a little odd that my book just came out and you're telling me this, but okay. And she proceeded to tell me that about her cat. And I said, well, I hope you keep your cat indoors. And she said to me, now I do. I jumped ahead a second. Now I do. My cat is named Moose, and after its mustache, Mustachio. And I had two previous cats to Mustachio, and one was killed by a coyote, and the other was hit by a car, the most common way cats are killed that are not on leashes. And she said, now I keep my cat on a leash, and I train my cat to stop at the corner, to walk across the street. She doesn't run with her cat, but the fact that she walks her cat on a leash, she gets her cat outdoors, activated, and she's stimulating her cat like we do for any animal that we have. We have a responsibility to take care of our pet, not just open the door and let it go out and take care of its own business. So I've seen in the past 4 to 5 years, a lot more people walking their cats. And so this gets to this bigger issue of when will we start treating cats like dogs in a responsible way, on leashes, in other sorts of enclosures. We need to put licenses on cats. We can't just let cats roam free because they're not part of nature. The other thing is a catio. These are outdoor patios that people started to build in Portland and in Texas and San Antonio. People are starting to do catio and wine tours where they're showing off their catios, where their cats are safe, wildlife is safe. These are wonderful solutions to what is really a vexing and long-term problem. But how are we going to deal with these? How are we going to deal with these remaining outdoor unowned cats? These are the real problem animals. The ones where nobody owns them, nobody wants to take responsibility for them. People feed them, and they continue to breed. How are we going to deal with these? These are the real problem cats, the ones where the cat wars are created. This is the issue. Owned cats, that are let outside, these are a problem too, but frankly, there should be no excuse for owned cats. If you own a cat and you let it outside, it needs to be the last cat that you let outside if you've got no solution to keeping it indoors. Owned cats should just never be allowed to go outside, period. So with the unowned cats, the main solution that's been proposed is something called trap, neuter, return. And in its essence, trapping and neutering cats is a great thing. It's the returning I have a problem with. So the idea here is that if you trap and you neuter enough cats, reproduction will stop, and over time, these cat populations will go extinct. Well, folks, there's weak empirical support for this, that this actually happens, that these cat populations decline and go extinct. There's very little. And to illustrate this, I'm going to show you a study from a researcher, and I use that term loosely, by the name of Julie Levy, who's based at University of Florida. She's a veterinarian. She did a study, and this study is cited a lot by the cat advocates. She started off with 155 cats in 1991, and she did her study over 11 years to look at this. 73 of these cats were immediately adopted out, 47%. That is a spectacular result. Totally agree that is wonderful, and that should be the goal. The problem is that's not trap, neuter, return. That should not be part of the experiment. So when I analyze her data, I immediately eliminate those series of cats, and 82 is really her starting point, not 155, because adoption is not, that's trap, neuter, adopt. That's not trap, neuter, return. When you look at what happened to those 82 cats, 17 were immediately euthanized. So that suggests that close to 20% of the cats were sick enough that they shouldn't be alive. That's not a good sign. That says a lot about the overall condition of cats in nature, right? That's very, very informative right there. 10 were found dead, 6 killed by cars, 4 they had no idea what happened to them. They found them, but they couldn't identify the cause of death. So again, that in their mind is a humane way to die. So they argue that trap, neuter, return allows these cats to die humanely. 32 of these cats were lost. Where'd they go? This is a scientific study. They have no idea where these 32 cats went. That is the vast majority of their known outcome, so-called known outcome cats. Now, I can tell you where these cats went. Because when an animal is hit by a car, it's not that common that animal just stays on the road. A lot of time that cat or that raccoon or whatever it happens to be, or the dog, is injured but runs off immediately and then bleeds out somewhere far off the road. And in this case, they probably couldn't find them. In other cases, these cats were just roaming and just dispersed, so completely out of the control of this study. And they didn't say how many of these were actually neutered. So in 2002, 23 cats were still remaining after 11 years. And these cats are still spreading disease, potentially preying on wildlife, etc. So I gave this talk in 2017 on a World Veterinarian webinar. Hundreds of veterinarians on the call. And Julie Levy was on the call when I gave the talk. And she said, Dr. Marra, how could you say that this didn't work? We had a decline of 23. And even to this day, we're now down to 18 cats. And I just couldn't believe this person said this to me. In 2018, that's 2001, almost 20 years later, there's still cats on the landscape. 18 cats still on the landscape, still preying on cats, on wildlife. So the population declined, no question, but you need to look at how it declined. Many were euthanized, several were found dead hit by cars, and then many were lost. That is not a successful program. It's certainly not a humane program. So there's weak empirical support. Again, it's inhumane to leave the cats outside, as I've already said. They get hit by cars. They get taken by predators. They pick up disease. The evidence for this is overwhelming. That's not a humane solution. Not only that, in order to get these populations to decline over time, you need to capture and neuter at least 75%, but closer to 90% of the cats. Most of these populations you can't catch that many cats. They're very hard to catch. And these populations are monitored by really well-meaning, hard-working citizens that don't have the experience to work with animals. So it's a hard thing to do. Furthermore, immigration continues in the colony. People continue to dump cats in these areas, which continues to be a major problem because people don't think they can take care of their cat. They want to bring it to a local shelter. Those local shelters are what's known as no-kill shelters, and they're saturated. They can't take any more animals. And people see these cat colonies out there, and all of a sudden, they dump their cats there. Furthermore, it's not scratching the surface at all. A few years ago, Julie Levy and a few other groups proposed to do the 1 million cat sterilization project. I forget exactly what the name of it was, but they wanted to sterilize 200,000 cats a year over 5 years to hit 1 million sterilized cats. Well, remember when I was telling you that there are somewhere between 30 million and 180 or 80 million cats outside. Even if there are 20 million cats, and let's say the 2 million cats are already sterilized, they're going to sterilize another, I'll even say 2 million cats. That leaves 16 million cats that are, half are female. So 8 million cats left that are producing 2 to 3 litters a year. There's no way, they're not even scratching the surface on this problem. It's a tremendous, tremendous issue. Finally, how are we evaluating the success of something like TNR? It's only from the cat's perspective, ignoring the entire ecosystem that's out there, that environment and that ecosystem, like groups like the Swampscott Conservancy work so hard to protect. So with all of its species in it. That being said, folks, we've got a tremendous problem on our hand. And so, even though I told you all that, I will be the first to acknowledge that not all areas are the same from a biodiversity perspective. And we're not going to solve this TNR problem overnight. In places like Washington, D.C., I've heard estimates that there are somewhere between 300 and 350 TNR colonies in D.C., close to 400 in places like Baltimore. In Boston, I'm sure there's equally high numbers. As you get into colder and colder areas, there are fewer, but there's plenty there, trust me. You just don't see them. So I think we need to figure out places to compromise here. And so what I propose is that if you're going to leave a cat colony out in the environment, it's got to be in a place where it's confirmed low impact from a biodiversity and human disease perspective. This has to be determined by a wildlife official and human health official, not by a cat person. You need to make sure that that biodiversity impact is maintained, that there's no impact over time. You need to make sure there's maximum sterilization and vaccination of these animals, and that there's regular and proper census methodology. Right now, almost none of this happens at any colony on the planet. Trust me, none of this happens. And if any of these things are violated, then you need to reevaluate the presence of those cats in the environment. At the same time, there needs to be a zero tolerance policy in high priority conservation areas where no cats are allowed at all, ever. And this is true in the Boston area. I'm sure there are many areas that are high priority conservation areas. The entire state of Hawaii, every state has them, every town has them. These have to be zero tolerance policy areas where wildlife are protected like they're meant to be. And those cats need to be removed. What do you do with them once they're removed? Well, hopefully you can adopt some of them out to responsible families that will keep their cats indoors and that will not dump them, not let them go outside. It's very possible. There are other options like Cat House on the Kings. These are large cat sanctuaries that some people maintain are worth doing. Given the number of cats out there, we'd have to fence in the entire state of Rhode Island if we wanted to do this with all cats. Given you folks live in Boston and Massachusetts, it's probably okay with you. But I'm guessing the good residents of Rhode Island wouldn't necessarily be okay with this. So that doesn't leave a lot of options. And the fact of the matter is that people like wildlife officials, people on refuges, people in some towns that have to deal with this don't have many options. And so it leaves one option for discussion, and that is euthanasia. It's an option that many veterinarians would argue is the best and most humane solution out there. It is like putting an animal to sleep. I'm not suggesting it's the best solution, but if we cannot maintain in a responsible way the cat populations that are out there, we don't have much of a choice. Australia is already doing this. Australia has entered into a phase where they have to take out 2 million cats, feral cats, because cats have caused many species extinctions and continue to cause species extinctions in Australia. So it's a tremendous problem. So folks, we have an enormous wildlife conflict here, human wildlife conflict that's been raging for over 100 years. And, you know, we have solved some of these problems in the past, so I remain optimistic. I'm seeing changes here. I'm seeing people keep cats on leashes. I'm seeing people build catios. I'm seeing more people take the pledge that this will be my last cat that I let outdoors. They're trying to modify the behavior of the cats. They're letting it out less and less. So I'm seeing this happen, but there's still so much more to do. And it's easy to say, you know, we've got so many problems, we're not going to fight this one, but this is one of the biggest problems. It truly is from a wildlife perspective. And we've battled big problems before. Who would have thought that we would stop smoking indoors? I mean, I grew up with that. You guys, most of you did too. But now you can't smoke inside in almost all states. Who thought we'd, you know, be able to eliminate DDT when we did, or allow gay marriages? There are enormous numbers of things that we've thought of as being, you know, verboten and difficult challenges that we've gotten over. This is another one that we can get over because it's the right thing to do. And so I remain hopeful. I truly remain hopeful that this is something that we can win. We have to, because I've seen the data and I believe the data. So that's all I've got to say. I'd gladly take some questions if folks have some questions. See, there's some things in the chat. That's correct. Yeah.
Go ahead, Tony.
I have a few questions, but the first one, I'm just curious. In the United States, do you see it as sort of more of a problem in different regions? Like I think of the South, where they really don't, you know, spay their or fix their animals, and they seem to dump them a lot. I mean, for the feral cats especially, do you see something, the problem regionally being in some places worse than others?
So certainly with dogs, the Southeast is a huge problem. And a lot of the dogs that are brought up here for adoptions at shelters are brought up here from the South, up to like the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, are brought up from the Southeast. The cat issue, I can't say that that's the case. The cat issue is a huge problem all over in San Francisco, in California, in the Southwest. When my book came out, I went on tour around the country and I gave this talk throughout Texas. The problems in Texas are tremendous. And so we have such a poor understanding of the distribution of and the numbers of outdoor cats, because no one wants to count them. They're hard to count in the first place, but nobody wants to estimate the numbers of cats. They don't want people to know where their cats are because they're worried that people are going to kill the cats or get rid of the cats. So I don't know if it's true that there are more cats out in the Southeast. I don't know if that's true. It's a problem.
Yeah, I was just curious. And also, I have 2 cats. They're indoor cats.
Right.
And I wouldn't think of taking them out on a leash because they're very content, you know, being in the house and don't think of going out. So why show them, you know, the outside where then they might want to go out and sneak out. So I keep them inside. But one thing, when you were talking about the Toxoplasma, whatever it was, my cats do hunt occasionally in the house because I have mice sometimes getting in, especially this time of year. Do I have to worry about the mice that are coming in, bringing in this disease?
It's, you know, the chances are low, but that is one area of entry where you could get toxo in the house. If you're feeling fine, it's probably not an issue, but toxo has a lot of hidden things. I mean, read the article. I think Colleen posted it in the chat. Don't get scared. but it's significant. I mean, some people get really sick from it. It was one of the big causes of mortality during the AIDS crisis, because people that are compromised, when their immune systems are compromised, are particularly vulnerable to toxo. And so it's a real problem at that point. I've been tested. You can get tested. I'm negative. Yeah.
I'm just worried that, I can't, the mice come in and I can't
Nothing you
stop
can
the
do.
cats
Yeah.
from hunting them and partially eating them. So I just would,
Yeah,
I guess there's nothing I can do about that.
Going back to your content cats, if your cats are content, that's fine. But a lot of people, that have cats, their cats are always at the screen door or always wanting to they're meowing to get outside. And so in those cases, walking them on a leash is a good solution because they require some sort of stimulation. A lot of this is from an own cat perspective, it really is about pet responsibility, pet ownership responsibility. And if you think about when I grew up, I didn't have a dog at the time, but people would just let their dogs roam around, and dogs bit people. Rabies were a problem. Dog fights were a problem. Dogs get hit by cars. And most towns and municipalities started to enforce leash laws and licensing. We don't do that with cats for the most part. Why? I mean, we should. Cats are a domesticated animal. It's a pet. People should be required to put their cats on leashes if they're going to leave them outside.
So Pete, I think you just stole my question, because my question was going to be, what lessons from kind of the culture shift that we see when dealing with dogs could translate to cats? Like, in addition to, maybe getting rabies and getting bit by a dog is a scarier prospect than, lower probabilities of perhaps having a conflict with a cat. But was there anything else that led to that culture shift? Because while I do remember dogs being off leash, as a kid, I think I don't remember what the cultural change was as a society that led us to kind of have leash laws and licensing and the like.
Yeah, I think rabies was a big part of it, because dogs were the #1 domesticated species to transfer rabies to humans. Guess what it is now?
Cats.
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 Cats. Bats are the primary wild animal, but domesticated cats are the #1 way humans get rabies now from domesticated animals. Cats also spread the plague still in the West. It's rare, but it happens. And it's just about your animal. I have 2 dogs now. I've got 2 golden retrievers, a puppy and an adult, and they need stimulation. They need to be played with. They need to be run. They need to be walked. They need to go outside. So people get cats thinking, oh, I can have a low maintenance animal, and your cat needs just as much stimulation, whether it's a feather pointer or a laser pointer, whatever it happens to be. They need some loving. They need some, exercise. They need all those things. Unless you have 2 and they can take care of themselves, but it's a lot of cats just need that stimulation.
They do. They are less I've had dogs, 2 dogs and 2 cats at the same time. Dogs do take a lot more of your time. You got to take them out. Cats sleep 85% of the day, so it is easier. Which actually, as we're talking, my cat just came up to say hi.
She wasn't offended.
Do you have advice that a town could take in terms of helping to change the culture and implementing rules and regulations around this?
Yeah, so it's a contentious issue, and my guess is every town has a cat group that is, when there's a town hall meeting, and most town halls and towns don't want to deal with it because they know how contentious it's going to be, but it shouldn't be contentious because frankly, the data are really clear. And, but there are still very few towns that require licenses or require leashes because, they don't want to enforce it, for one. And the other problem is that because many towns are strapped financially, they have gotten rid of their animal control, or they've really reduced their animal control groups. And what they've done is they've contracted it out to so-called humane societies, which are local nonprofits, just like the Swampscott Observatory or their conservancy. But these are humane societies or so-called SPCAs or Alley Cat Allies or whatever, Feral Cat Coalition, whatever they are. Then they say, well, save the animal. You know, they argue that they're all about saving lives, basically. But it's not about saving lives. It's about saving cats. It's not about saving cerulean warblers or piping plovers or star-nosed moles. It's not about saving native species. It's about cats. And these groups then dictate the policies in these towns. And this has happened all over America. You've got local nonprofits that are basically advocacy organizations pushing their agendas. And so when you get into these towns and you say you have somebody who wants to push an issue like Deb and says, you know, we should take this issue up because it's the right thing to do. I'm guessing there were probably 30 people, I don't know how many, 20 for every one Deb that were out there trying to, you know, fight against this resolution to stop allowing outdoor cats. And that's been repeated over and over again. And it's a shame because there are a lot of birders out there, but I would argue that many birders are not conservation biologists. They're not interested in the conservation. They want to enjoy birds, but they don't see that enjoying birds means protecting birds too.
Are there certain success stories from small towns that you could point to as places where lessons could be learned or modeled?
So there are less from town. Ottawa is one city that requires outdoor cats to be, cats on leashes and requires them to be licensed. There's a town in Colorado that the name's escaping me right now. There's very few, unfortunately. But there's a need for more and more towns. There's cases, just recently in Long Island, there was a cat colony in Long Island that was right next to a breeding piping plover colony. And the American Bird Conservancy took up the issue and got the cats removed. But it took enormous amounts of legal action to fight the cat groups because the cat groups are supported by pet food companies. And pet food companies are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And so they're supporting, the cat food industry is supporting a lot of these cat advocacy groups because they're continuing to feed outdoor cats. They're supporting everything they're about. And so it's a mess.
It sounds like we maybe have to find the cat food company that also sells bird seed. They're our weakest link.
They do. There are Pedigree is one. They do both, but
But more of their sales are for cats than birds.
Totally. Oh yeah, by far. And the bird people don't really see the contradiction.
I was wondering approaching it incrementally with the town, like trying to get everything passed at once, you know, is hard. But starting with something like licensing the cats and making sure that they've got rabies shots and whatnot, you can appeal to the public, you know, because this is for their health, you know, you don't want to get rabies. So dogs are licensed and stuff. So you start incrementally with that, get that passed in the bylaw, and then slowly work your way, you know, into more significant requirements like dogs have.
I think that's a good idea. I think that's a good plan. Do you think you can get that passed?
I don't know. I think it's worth a try.
Tony can get anything passed.
Deb, you're muted, Deb, you know, tried to pass a very comprehensive bylaw and it didn't pass. So I was thinking that, you know, focusing in on that, you know, step by step might be the way to go, combined with an educational program to, you know, let people understand, you know, the problem.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Now we can hear you.
When I did that attempt, I knew that it was too comprehensive, but the feedback was often, oh, cats aren't like dogs. They don't need a license. There was a lot of pushback regarding how cats are so different from dogs that we shouldn't be doing what we do with dogs. So I don't know where to start. I don't know if licensing is the first place. I think just the education maybe, without any putting anything on people to do to their cats, except maybe keep them inside for a while. But I will say in a positive sense that after I did the presentation, a lot of people who had been against keeping their cats in actually got in touch with me and said that I had persuaded them. So that was sort of a triumph.
That's great.
Yeah.
So is there an outdoor, are there a lot of outdoor cats there?
Yes, I forget, it's a couple of years ago that I did the presentation, but I'm happy to send it to you because it has a lot of statistics for Massachusetts too.
Huh, that's interesting, yeah.
Yes, people do have their cats outside here. You see them. Yes.
So
based on the number of missing cat signs that I see around town, there are a significant number of outdoor cats.
It's very sad.
that's because of coyotes. Coyotes are expanding, I'm sure, in that area in a big way. And I have a hard time understanding how people can continue to justify putting their cats outside when they're getting killed by coyotes,
Yes.
hit by cars.
I have a neighbor behind me who, not just coyotes, well, the neighbor next door, both of her cats were carried off by coyotes. Thank goodness she doesn't have cats anymore. But a neighbor behind me watched one of her cats get killed by a car, and she continues to let the other cat out.
Yeah, see, that's where it becomes an issue that I don't think people should be deciding. I think that should be a regulation that's inflicted by the town, because that to me is inhumane.
Right.
I mean, it is always inhumane, but if there's already a person living in a place where a cat's been killed, or coyotes have killed the cats, or a car, whatever it happens to be, that's animal endangerment.
Yes.
And so
I've heard a lot of people actually say that the cat should decide if it should be an indoor or outdoor cat.
right, that's a problem. I mean, again, it's nothing. This is nothing but supportive of cats.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, with respect to the feral cats, is there anything a town or like the Conservancy can do about that?
That's where it becomes a problem. So you need to figure out what your animal control facilities are in your town or in your county. Do you have a county?
Essex County, yes, we're part of Essex County, yes.
Who's your animal? Is there an animal control facility nearby?
We have actually a part-time Swampscott animal control person.
And
have you talked to this person?
Marblehead. There's a place in Marblehead that's a cat shelter.
Right, don't call the cat shelter. I mean, so the cat shelter, chances are they are doing trap, neuter, return. And they'll catch the cats and they'll return them and they'll start feeding those cats there.
Yeah, they do that.
And they do that, yeah. And so, especially if it's called a cat shelter, that means that's all they do. And I'd be curious to know where they get their money. If their money is from the county or it's from the Swampscott or Marblehead or where. But does the county have an animal control person?
We're not really, the county really doesn't dictate. It's the town that, the town.
Yeah, we're not organized. Like when I lived in New Jersey, we organized services by the county level and then by town. We don't have that kind of hierarchy here in Massachusetts. Towns are very independent of one another. So, and I thought our animal control agent was now full-time. I thought that just
He is.
Yeah.
He's fabulous.
Oh, so that's not somebody with the cat shelter.
No, that's town.
I see. Okay, so you need to make cookies, dinners for that guy. Do whatever you can.
He's great. He's very, he's quite an advocate for animals. He'll do pretty much anything to save any kind of animal. He's very responsive. His name is Dan Proul. And he believes that cats should stay indoors.
Yeah. So you need to talk to him about make sure everyone understands what the rules are for these unowned cats. And so I'd be curious to hear what he says about the options for the unowned cats. So that are let outside, that are not leashed, that are not owned by anybody. And if they're going on private property, what does that mean? What if they go on city property? What if they are potentially spreading disease? Have they ever been tested for disease? So what are the various levers that you all have for those cats? Because that's the issue. If there's, and I'm guessing there are colonies, that cat shelter that you know about, they are probably helping to monitor several cat colonies in the area.
Yeah.
And you have vets nearby that are probably participating in those trap, neuter, return events that they have.
Yeah, to an extent, it sounds like maybe the public health aspect is probably the easiest for leveraging for some sort of legal stance versus advocacy for birds. Even though we know that I'm all here for the birds, not really for people.
Well, the Swampscott Conservancy is about protecting open spaces, wild spaces, I would think, right? Wild spaces. And so those wild spaces, I'm curious, of all the areas that the Swampscott Conservancy advocates for and works to keep clean of invasive species, I'm sure I can imagine all the work that you guys do on these different pieces of land. I wonder how many of those have cats on them. I bet you more than you think.
Yeah, how do you find out? How do you?
Cat cam, do watch trail cams. I mean, if you pull together your volunteers,
Yeah.
have some money, buy some cameras, buy 10 cameras. It's a volunteer activity. Get a local high school student to do it and put out those cameras and start looking at the distribution of cats you have or wildlife you have on all the areas that you guys work on. I'd be really curious about that.
Yeah, we could do that without too heavy a lift if we have people who wanted to monitor them. I have 6 trail cams we could set up.
Yeah. And
Would
sort of
we work
understand
with
the
the high
issue.
school or how about Salem State or something?
Salem State might be a better option just because I'm hesitant. We should stop recording actually. Salem State might be the better option.
Yeah, I mean, whoever it is, I mean, you guys can do it. But it's, these are areas that you're protecting for nature, for wild plants and animals. And if there's cats there, that's not happening. And wouldn't it be cool if you got a coyote or a fisher or something else on those a weasel on those trail cams? How cool would that be?
That would
We
be.
do have coyotes in town.
Yeah.
That's also becoming something to divide the population here. The anti-coyote people and the.
Oh, I know. I love coyotes. I don't understand.
Oh, they're
People
beautiful.
are so threatened by coyotes.
I see the same coyote every morning because I go to work at like 1 or 2 in the morning and I see an adolescent coyote roaming around when I'm driving to work.
Wow.
We had a very sad, scary incident recently.
Horrible.
Somebody set a trap and a bear trap. I don't know what kind of trap, and it
It was
caught.
a jaw trap.
What was it?
A jaw. So the animal puts its snout into it and gets
And it
trapped.
caught a coyote, and the coyote had to be put to sleep. But that could have been somebody's pet, somebody's cat, or God forbid, somebody's child. I mean, who the heck was thinking or not thinking to put out a trap like that?
Yeah.
So how about this? I'm going to officially close the presentation and stop recording, but we can continue the conversation. Does that sound okay? So on behalf of the Swampscott Conservancy, I just want to say thank you again for joining us this evening. And this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel in the future.
Great.
Thank you.
My pleasure.